Welcome to Hopeful Conversations, brought to you by Robbie's Hope Foundation. I am your host, Kari Eckert. Joining me today is Laura Mahoney, a licensed therapist and board-certified neurofeedback clinician for Lux Neuro. Lux Neuro is a neurofeedback and counseling center that seeks to address both conscious and subconscious parts of humans when treating patients. Through this technique, they have been successful in treating a wide range of conditions by reestablishing the connection between the mind and body. Laura, thank you for joining me today on Hopeful Conversations.
Thank you, Kari. That was a great introduction.
So let's just start with, how does neurofeedback work?
Okay. Um, so, big question. There's a lot of information, but I try to distill it down into really consumable bites, so to speak. So, neurofeedback is a process where the first step is we measure the brain waves and the electrical activity of the brain. We do this through an EEG. So we put a cap on the head and we're measuring the brain in 19 different areas. So, in general, our brain has restorative brain waves, and those I call the being brain waves. It also has action brain waves, and I call those the doing brain waves. We need all of these brain waves, but we don't want to see them at the wrong time and the wrong place. So, an example of the doing brain waves would be when I get up, I need to perhaps do my workout. I need to be in the world. I need to be externally focused. I need to perhaps speak on a podcast and have a lot of energy. So think of energy in the body to animate it and energy in the mind. Those are the doing brain waves. If we have way too much, we're going to feel anxious. We can also think of it, the new metaphor I'm also thinking of is just gasoline for your car. So it's like you just have a lot of energy so you can do the things that you need to do in your day. When we are done with that, let's say we had a big stressful day, we need to relax, because if you run your car at 100, 150 miles an hour constantly, that we all know doesn't work. So we have the being brain waves, and those are brain waves where we can relax, we can maybe sit down and be able to shut our brain down a little bit, shut our bodies down a little bit. So that's if we have a big workout and we need to repair all the micro tears that might have happened, or if we just had a lot of mental activity and we need to do that. Then we need to also completely shut down our mind and our body, and that's when we go to sleep. And that's an unconscious state to a semi-conscious state. And then we also have brain waves of presence. And I guess in past podcasts I haven't talked about that, but the brainwave of presence is really a healing brainwave for many reasons. And so we'll get into that later, but in general, now you have the being and doing brainwaves. So we can tell when I'm just waking up out of a sound sleep, I'm going to be kind of present, kind of not, and I'm going to be foggy feeling. I do not want that brainwave going on. It's called a theta brainwave when I am in school and I'm trying to learn something. If I were to give you Shakespeare to read, and if I were to say, read this and summarize it, you would not be able to do a very good job. So people really relate to that. And so that's what happens in maybe an inattentive type ADD. If you conversely, if we have those anxiety brain waves and hypervigilance, and your brain is just going, 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 that is not the brain wave that we want to have happen when I'm trying to go to sleep, because I need to be internally focused. I need to shut the world out. And if I can't shut the world out because my brain is externally focused, perhaps looking for a danger, I'm going to wake up when, let's say, my son is cooking bacon at 11 o'clock at night, which has happened in my household. And we don't want the sensory system going. We want it to shut down so we can shut off. So we want to go from a shut off state completely to semi shut off to being to doing, and then have this nice brain flexibility where we have all the ability to gear shift up and shift down throughout our lives, throughout our days. So we're measuring that. We can tell that through an EEG.
So you as the practitioner, what do you take away from this information that helps me as the client? Is that a fair next question?
Totally, yes. So I take all of that information. We record the brain 10 minutes eyes open and 10 minutes eyes closed. I will take all that information and I'm looking at the raw data. There's information that I can see in the raw data that will help me to see how this brain may be affected by what the electrical activity is doing. Such as like we can see things like epileptiform discharges, or there's just these little you can see it in the shape of the brainwave. It's not an overt epilepsy, but it can cause significant disruption in mood. So people who have emotional outbursts, or and sometimes neurodivergent, where it's like and they just can't take it, or they get really, I call it explosions, or sometimes implosions. Something happens and they suppress, and then they just have to go and they implode. And it's very intense emotion, sometimes pseudobulbar affect, which is something where it's like your affect, or what your facial expressions are, don't match what should be. So laughing at the wrong time type of thing. And then I'm also looking at, I can see, I create what I call the story of the brain. So I also can create two different reports, plus looking at the raw data, which tells me, are you producing the wrong brain, the right brain wave, because we're producing all of them at the same time, but is it at the wrong time in the brain? And how does that correlate with symptoms? So let's say depression, we can see that's a slowing in the brain, usually in the right front part. The right front of the part of the brain is where we really want to process a lot of information. We want to be engaged in the world. And when that's idling, it's very frustrating for the brain and it causes a sad blue depression. That's on the logical side, which is the left side. On the right side, it can cause an irritable depression. So the brain gets irritated on the emotional side because it doesn't want to be sloggy. We can also see low motivation when we have idling brainwaves, when we're supposed to be doing. Um, and we can also see light or poor sleep. We can see hypervigilance. So if you have in the back of the brain, which is your sensory area, if we see somebody who has a lot of doing brainwaves, and maybe even into anxiety, that person is going to be looking for the threat all the time, because that's where it needs a lot of energy to make sure that there's nothing that's a threat. So we can also see impulsivity, compulsivity, OCD, perfectionism. Some people say it's when they get their map review. So I go over all of this information in a 1 hour appointment where I tell the person the story.
Sounds like a lot to go over.
It
Very
is a lot to
interesting.
go over, and we kind of did it today in just a short amount of time. But yeah, the nuts and bolts. So we take the concepts of being and doing, and then we apply it by looking at where it's happening in the brain, when it's happening, to correlate it with behaviors such as anxiety and depression.
Huh, because neuro, you're trying, mostly do individual couples, mostly you do like all different types of therapy, individuals, couples, and families.
Mhm. I do not do
And
couples
it,
therapy. I have someone on my staff who does couples therapy.
okay.
However, I work with very young to people in their 80s. The brain can change at any time. I've seen incredible results in people in, the later decades of life, which I adore because I'm in the middle to getting up there, and so but it's really cool to see people who have had lifelong patterns change. Um, and I love that. And with kiddos who, one of the things that's coming to me lately that I love is, you have this identity, you know who you are, and you've really practiced who you are. You've done the reps, and you're doing that through like what your brain is doing. So let's say you have somebody who's impulsive, and somebody who's always going to talk, and somebody who's going to do this, and you just expect that, and other people expect that of that person and that
Hmm.
individual. So the cool thing is when we train the brain through neurofeedback, we can make it so they're not impulsive. They're still themselves. It does not change their personality, but we can reduce anxiety, depression, OCD, learning challenges in the classroom. And then so part of the work in the counseling arena, it's this art of what's neuro and what is therapy. I talk to people about your identity is going to change. Your personality won't change, but your identity is. And so, sometimes it takes a little bit of time, especially when you have like eights, nines, and tens on a subjective scale of 0 to 10 of impairment. So when you don't react, sometimes people are like, wait a minute, I'm used to you doing this, and you get treated a certain way, like you're the kid who fill in the blank, right? And so when you're not the kid who fill in the blank, you start to change, and sometimes that takes a little bit of time, both in yourself. In yourself, it's pretty easy because you're pretty happy. You're like, I didn't react to that. So I responded. So we have a lot of people moving them from reactivity to responsiveness. And what I find, one of my gifts is I see the light in everyone, and I see through the behaviors. And I know that it's not that they're not trying hard enough. It's not that they're lazy. It's not any of that. It's that they can't access who they know they are inside. And neurofeedback, with enough repetitions of doing what we want the brain to do, they're able to access who they truly know they are inside. And it's incredible to see. It's really amazing.
Hmm. How does the average person like land in your space? Like, how have you seen that? Have they tried other forms of traditional like talk therapy for depression potentially? Like, I mean, this is different, and I'm just wondering like who it's probably for everyone. Does that make a little bit of sense?
It totally makes sense. Sure. So some people, they've tried everything. I have some of those peeps. I also have, I also have people where it's somewhat of a last resort. It's sometimes the behaviors are so big that they're like, okay, we're just gonna try this. Um, a lot of people, however, it's word of mouth. So it's, you've got to try this, you've got to try this, you've got to try this. That I would say is probably the biggest. Or somebody has heard somebody else and they do their research and they, look, they research online neurofeedback as a modality of healing. Um, so those are the ways that we do it. Sometimes it's people, that I've talked to. But also, I also have people who they just become they're passionate like I am, and they become my little ambassadors, so to speak. And they're just like yeah. And once you go from the dysregulated side and impaired side to the other side, you just want everybody to experience it because you feel good. And I myself found it because several ways. My sons are neurodivergent. I'm neurodivergent, and throughout my life, I just knew that I was inside and I couldn't access it. So I had anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, but not wanting to kill myself. And despite having everything, and it didn't matter. And I was like, something's not right. I had learning challenges. I was at the top of my class. When I was younger. And then in middle school, it hit where all of a sudden I was like passing out of sleep when I was reading. And when I was younger, nobody knew about ADD. They didn't know about learning challenges. So I just had to get through, and I did. But it's frustrating knowing your intelligence and not being able to access it. And, complex PTSD. So I just have been through all the things, and I am spiritual, so I just was like, all right, this has got to stop, and it did. I found, in a magical way, I found my way to neurofeedback, and I was like, this is it. And it, because I knew it was my physiology, not what I was thinking, or that I wasn't trying hard enough. I was meditating an hour and a half a day. I was doing all the things that they told me, and it didn't work, and this worked. So
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
I reading the reviews, it was just like I was so overwhelmed, like compared to traditional therapy, like 30 sessions in 30 minutes, and it was like, okay, like wow, that's a really big statement.
Yeah.
Um, how is there like an average number? Say a person comes to you with depression, maybe a young person. I'm just trying to make this like a scenario for. is there an average number of sessions, or what is that process like? So they have you map their brain. What does it look like for the client, the patient?
Sure. So for the client, I always tell people 30 to 60 sessions is what to expect. The appointments are an hour. So we have time in that hour to either do half therapy, half neurofeedback, or if they're acclimated and they're feeling really great, I train them longer. So it might be a 15-minute check in, and then they get hooked up, and then they train for 45 minutes. Um, but I would say that most people in the clinic need about 40 to 55 sessions. And when I say 40 to 55, what I'm talking about is you're going to feel better, in the early sessions. But it's like an antibiotic. You need to take the full course of antibiotics to get better and have it be permanent. The other way I really love thinking about this is you need to do the reps. It's like doing the reps in the gym, and you're doing the reps every time you come in. So most people take about 40 to 55 sessions to have that be complete. Uh, and it's like if I were to learn to ride a skateboard, I would be pretty good at it at first, and then I might be a little wobbly, but as I practice, I would get better and better and better and better. If I truncated that and I was like, I'm pretty good. I can go in a straight line, and I can paddle, and I can stay on it, but I'm going really slow. But I can ride a skateboard technically. But you're not proficient at it. You haven't mastered it. So if I stopped in 2 or 3 years, I probably wouldn't be very good at riding the skateboard. However, if I practiced and I mastered it, I could spend years not riding the skateboard, get back on it, much like riding a bike. I haven't ridden a bike in 7 years ish. I can get back on a bike and I can ride it because my brain has mastered that. So, um,
Mm.
the other great thing about that is if we train the brain and there's something that is unwanted, because the brain is like, I have a good plan, but sometimes the brain is like, we don't want to go there yet, or I don't want to change, or this is the wrong place, then we can tell that within a session or two. And then after that, we can switch and we do a different protocol. So I'm constantly assessing because the brain hasn't learned, it hasn't had enough time. So it's very forgiving in that anything we like, we keep doing until the brain learns it. And we really know the brain likes it because we have a lot of sessions where we can determine that. If the brain doesn't like it, we pivot and we change to something. So I'm not going to train something where somebody's having a bad result. Um, and I'm going to pivot away from it. So it's very forgiving in that way, and safe, in my opinion.
I hear the word train. What does that mean? What does that mean?
So training the brain would be, in general, we are making it so the brain learns to regulate itself. So let's say we have a lot of doing brain waves. It's like if you get a text message, you hear that ding, and your brain goes, "Oh, somebody texted me. Usually it's positive, and who's that? I'm excited to hear from somebody I love." And so, especially if you set that tone to a certain tone and it's that person, so your brain gets that reward. Our brain likes that. So that's the premise upon which neurofeedback is set. So I can say these anxiety brain waves. Our brains are moving up and down in power all the time across all of the being and doing brain waves. So if I have anxiety brain waves, it will go down. I can set a threshold, and the brainwave will, once it goes down below that certain threshold, you'll hear a noise. It'll be a ding or a gong or some other feedback noise. That's why it's called neurofeedback. So you hear feedback noise, and then the brain goes, "Oh, I did something. I like it. That's cool." And so the brain learns to not produce as much anxiety brainwaves. We can also do that on the idling brainwaves, those being brainwaves, which can hang us up and make us feel not motivated and foggy. We can do the same thing down here. And then I can also train up brainwaves of presence. And that's in the middle of those being and doing brainwaves. And we can train that up. That's a very stabilizing brainwave. It's very healing. Our brains like to be in the present moment. In general, at least it feels good, is more what I should say. So these are all feedback noises. So if somebody's deficient, I can bring it up. And if they're overpowered, I can bring it down. And over time, that's an auditory feedback. Over time, that will train the brain. There's also visual feedback. There's what's called a dimmer screen. It can lighten and darken while the person is watching. And I should say the person is usually watching a show during this time. They don't have to be. They could be just sitting in a room listening to noises. But typically, the brain can multitask. So they can be watching a show, and in their headphones, they're hearing in the background these feedback noises. So we just give them something to pass the time, so to speak. The show is not training them, it's the feedback. And then I have another system where there's a tactile device where it vibrates or it doesn't. And then there's various rewards. So basically, it's based on a reward inhibit type thing.
Wow. How does that connect with like the counseling part, the training, and then like the counseling that is that what is the counseling part traditional to like what most people might envision like talk therapy is, or is it different?
Somewhat. We definitely can dig into the things that need to be dug into, but a lot of times by the time people see me, they've already done that. They've already talked about it. It's like sometimes when I go to therapy, I'm like, oh, do I have to talk about that again? I don't want to. Um, the nice thing is that we rely on the brain's innate intelligence to know what you need to bring back up into consciousness and what can just melt away. So, an example is, let's say somebody um, regularly abused you and you've really processed that. That brain has processed that a lot. So that is not going to probably come back up. The brain isn't going to release that information, so to speak, but sometimes we'll have memories come up. Sometimes it's good memories. Sometimes it's like, you know what? I did get invited to birthday parties. I just forgot that. Because your brain can get a negativity bias by looking for the danger to keep itself safe. I know I went through that. I have an amazing family, and over time, I had gotten into this it's part of the depression. Part of that was also because I wasn't on my path. Um, but I remember I did neurofeedback, and all of the sudden, I was so mired in my story of, oh, this happened and that happened and all the things. And yes, they did. However, I was like, boom, it was like a light switch. And I called my dad and I just was bawling. And I was like, I am so sorry I haven't been there for you. I have been in my stuff. And I just knew my brain had really shined its consciousness and the spotlight on the stuff that was my perception that was messing me up, probably to keep me safe. And I was like, oh my gosh, we had the best time as a kid, and we had these family gatherings, and I had a big family, and all the things just came back. And these are the things that you did for me. And was it perfect? No, but man, my brain forgot. And that's an example of how things can shift. Sometimes things just melt away. I have a patient driving anxiety, and I had this too. And I was driving on highways. I had a like kind of a vertigo experience in Eisenhower. And over the decades, eventually, by the time COVID hit, I just couldn't drive on highways. Most people don't know that probably about me because I'm a very strong, independent person. And I had to take all the back roads, and you can do that. But neurofeedback, I drive on the highways now, and I had a patient. I've had a lot of patients actually who experienced that, and they were like, "I'm driving on the highway," and it just melted away. It just wasn't there, and they said my brain is searching for the anxiety and it's not there. And so sometimes
Wow.
it just isn't there, and the trauma isn't there. I should have mentioned PTSD is a major thing that we work on. So yeah.
Is neurofeedback similar, like has similarities to like EMDR or no?
Somewhat. In EMDR, you have a target that you choose. And so you go through and you're reliving that um, while you're doing some kind of bilateral stimulation of the brain, whether it's tactiles in your hands, buzzing on one side and the other, or you're following a finger from left to right. It's taking what has not been packaged, and it's coming up in the present, and it's packaging it and putting it in its proper place.
Okay.
So
You mentioned PTSD. Do you want to visit more? I'm super interested in that because of my life experience, of course.
mhm,
Losing my son, and my husband, I can worry about both of us because we have not gone through EMDR. We've done more traditional therapy routes, but
mhm,
how could neurofeedback help someone with something like that?
right. So what I love about neurofeedback is I only address those things if they come up. So I'm not going to take you into that. Um, I am not in EMDR. Some of the things, EMDR is extremely effective. There are beautiful therapists. I know many that have amazing results with it. I think for sometimes for targeted things, you can use it. For me, when I tried it, it was difficult because I had a lot of ongoing things, and so there wasn't a really precise target. And if there were, then I would have to keep going through them again and again and again. But neurofeedback really can help you because you can get rid of the trauma in a more palatable way. So I always say I dip my toe in if it comes up. We see what is the life lesson that might need to be learned from this. What did you need to learn? Because if your brain is bringing it up, I feel that your brain is saying you need to look at this again, and we figure out what is the life lesson, whether it's powerlessness or I'm enough or um, I'm, some people think they're bad. I'm bad. Bad things always happen to me. People always abandon me. Um, and so we see what the life lesson is in that, and then we work with that. And that becomes empowering instead of powerlessness. Powerlessness is like a freeze response in the body that's going to cause mental health problems almost every time. A feeling of powerlessness, and we are powerless many times. So once we take charge of our emotions um, and our intuition, then we can typically heal from it. So the neurofeedback allows us to sometimes have things go away, so they're not so big, and then yeah, sometimes it's like I find people they're like, I just don't need to talk about that. I got this. I
Mm-hmm.
can access all the amazing therapy I've already had. Whereas sometimes when you're in it, you can't access the therapy. Your brain knows. So here's a good example. Your brain knows, it knows the therapy, it knows all the things, and you think, why can't I do this? And your body goes, the body is the subconscious. And the body goes, because we've lived through this and this is not safe and it sucked. And I'm going to make you so dysregulated, anxious, depressed, whatever. Do not do that again. We don't like that. And your head is over here. It's like, well, you shouldn't feel that way. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you I do. And your body can scream at you and dysregulate you. So you can't even think straight. So when neurofeedback allows us to calm the physiology down, calm the body. So now we have our head and our body aligned. And it's like your head, and then it can, like a good example is driving. So if I'm driving and I hate people who cut me off, that guy cut me off, and it's like your body's reacting, and but when you have neurofeedback, your body's calm, and your head goes, you don't like that guy, he cut you off, and your body goes, I'm calm, and your head goes, nope, we don't like that, we hate people who cut us off because ABC, and your body goes, but I'm calm, and your head goes, you are calm, and I don't care if you don't care. And then we align those two things, and then we can go on our way and we become responsive instead of reactive. We're staying in our frontal lobes instead of our reactive primal stem.
Huh. That was
It's
really good. That's like a great picture to I on your website I saw stress into strength and fear into freedom, and it seems like that kind of starts right there. Like
mhm,
these two different things like working together.
100%. Yeah. 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 And I know that this isn't that specifically, but I did, I'm not sure how much time we have, but
We're
um,
fine. We're fine.
okay. I'm like, I could talk forever because I love this stuff. It's just, the things that I see are incredible. But, I think, speaking to suicidality, um, if I may, I think that it can be really impactful to understand some of the things at play. So once we see things as brain waves, idling, not idling, and we understand the story our brain is doing, we understand why it's doing what it's doing, it can be really empowering instead of judging ourselves. Because if we judge ourselves, we're not going to be able to move through much. But when it's like, it makes sense that I'm depressed because I'm having an idling brainwave going on in that part of my brain that loves to learn, that loves to think, that loves to be in the world, that loves to. Nobody likes having, like, if I'm trying to go and I have somebody holding the back of my collar while I'm trying to walk, that sucks. And the brain doesn't like that. It shows up as a sad blue depression. So I can be in therapy and I can take you through all the reasons why you're depressed. And your brain is going to say, I feel this. It's the body saying, I feel this. The mind goes, we're going to need to make some meaning of that. Sometimes there's no meaning to make of it. It's because you have slowing going on in that part of your brain. And so that would be somebody who's chronically depressed and whatnot. They have a lot of slowing in their brain and a lot of idling, and they don't feel in the world. It's too slow to be that brainwave of presence. Brainwaves of presence are a little bit faster. It allows us to feel happy, content, enough. I'm okay. I'm okay here. I have open focus. I can connect in the present moment. I can't when I'm in that slog because I'm focused on my past. So we speed the brain up through neurofeedback and the depression goes away. So people who are more like that, you're going to catch that probably more easily because you can see it. You can see the depression. I love your parent handbook where you are talking about having conversations. I love the intuition part because that's the body. I'm big on cultivating intuition in the work that I do. Um, because if you don't, you can get really messed up by not following your intuition. So I can talk about that later. But I think the part that's really challenging is the people who are impulsive and their brains get locked on, they get hyper focused, and they mask, and they might do like think do's, think says. Their brain in the front, it's in the front right. So we have our gear shift in the front middle. That's the part that can get locked on. And it can get locked on to alcohol, drugs, suicidal ideation. It can get locked on to studying the brain. So it doesn't differentiate, the brain doesn't differentiate between a good thing to get locked onto or a bad. And this is in quotes, right? Something that's harmful or something that's not. The brain is just looking for something to latch onto. That can be because maybe in their past, they felt powerless. They had situations where the world is unpredictable. So I'm going to try and control everything I can. So it tries to control everything it can and it tries to lock onto things. And then it becomes impulsive, compulsive. And we have impulsivity and compulsivity. Um, I've worked with teens, especially because their brains are more wired to be impulsive and compulsive. So when it's like, I got a bad grade, I'm going to take a thing of pills, whole thing of ibuprofen or something. Um, their brain is going into think do. There's no pause. I had somebody that was in my house, and this was a really good example. They were walking through, they were a kiddo, and they see a giant, and this is a giant ball you sit on. And it was in my living room, and they looked at it and they went, kick. And they ball kick, think. That's not the order that we want. So it was ball kick, think. And then it was like, oh, and because the ball just launched, it hit the wall and it missed the picture. Everything was great. But that's an example of what can happen. I even see adults. It's like, I got married. And it's like, it was the wrong person. And then suicidality comes in. And so those are the people that we really want to be conscious of. And that's where your handbook comes in. So it's like, have those conversations, especially with impulsive people, because you don't know what's going on. And if they're masking and they're trying to be perfect or whatever, but then if they're like a think do, you might miss it. And then so if you do catch that, it's really important. I have people who have been suicidal multiple years in a row, and now they're not. We've gotten them through the anniversary, and they're happy and they're doing great through neurofeedback, and they're not suicidal anymore. So those are the ways that, like, suicidality can show up. I think one stems from anxiety, very high anxiety. The other one stems from depression. And I think before I was a clinician, I thought that suicidality would stem from depression, and you'd always see it. And it's not. It's the impulsivity and the think do's and whatnot. So I know that was long,
Yeah.
but
No, it's helpful. It's hard because, like, developmentally, where a 15-year-old brain is at compared to a 30-year-old, because of that impulsivity, that's hard. Robbie was 15 years old when he died. So, yeah, and it's it's tough. It's tough conversations, but I like that they're, just visiting with you because there's help available and there's different types of help available. And I think that's really important for people to understand and to take into account. Like, when, talk therapy might work for a person, meds might work for a person, neurofeedback might work for a person. And we don't always know what is going to work for which person. So, like, keep trying, keep asking, to find what works for you.
right. Yeah. And in the teen realm, I find that a lot love this because it's not always about talking sometimes. Sometimes it's that physiology. It's like your physiology is driving the bus, and it's really hard and it's a long, arduous process to get at the physiology by talking. It's more that the brain has learned at a deep subconscious level to react. The reaction is fast. It's like you and we don't even know what the threat is, right? So it's like my son who's neurodivergent, I remember a teacher on a walkie-talkie across the playground. Boom, gonna make him start feeling dysregulated because, oh my gosh, I get in trouble because I'm impulsive and and it's like, mom's gonna get called. And that's the lion. So it's like you see a lion, the second that image hits your cornea, you're in your primal stem. You're not thinking, you're in your reaction mode at that point. And we don't see things as the lion. We see it as a teacher on a walkie talkie. And why would you ever care about that? Or you don't even make that correlation. I have somebody I know, work is stressful for them. So their lion is looking at a computer. And it's like boing, dysregulated. But if you can understand the physiology, it's not that you're not trying hard enough. It's what is the lion for you? And then that's the cue to do some of the breath work and the self awareness. So, a beautiful thing about neurofeedback, too, is we really become aware of what is our physiology doing? What are the triggers? This and that. So, it's very circuitous, and all the sessions are so incredible because you're really finding out things like, what's your lion? And then the people are making connections and they're like, oh my God. Or somebody who has a lot of slowing in their brain. I tell them, you're not lazy. Your brain is too slow. It doesn't have the power, it doesn't have the juice to be as animated as I am. It doesn't. It's like you're pushing the car because it doesn't have the gas. And you're trying as hard as you can to move that car, where somebody else has gas and they just go in and they push that gas pedal and they're going. That person might have too much gas and they might not sleep at night because they have too much gas. That person is not going to be shamed because we value doing, and we can't see what they're doing at night. So I don't care that you can't sleep, but if I told that person just go to sleep, that person would be like, I can't go to sleep. Just go to sleep. It's the same thing telling somebody they're lazy. Just do it. I can't.
Hmm.
And it's telling people that is like everything sometimes.
This is interesting. Super, super interesting.
Yeah.
Where does a person find out more? Like, your website, share with us. And then if it's, you can do this remotely as well, I think is what I understand. So if a person isn't physically close to Denver, they can still get this great option for them. So share with us that.
Sure. So my website is luxneuro.com, LUXNEURO.com. Lux is Latin for light, not luxury. I know, because I'm all about light and energy. So I say that because I'm very much committed to light and seeing the light in the brain, seeing the light in every person. It's everything to me. And I studied Latin and ancient Greek a long time ago. So I love Latin. But that is where you find us. You can also go info@luxneuro.com. Our phone number is on the website, so that's usually a really, really great place to start. Starting to do social media probably soon. I just haven't done it because, quite frankly, I've been really busy. But I have podcasts on there. This will go on the website as well. So that's how you find me.
Awesome. Okay, before I let you go, we ask all of our who we have conversations with, Laura, what does the world need to hear right now?
I would say that there's hope, that you can go from surviving your life to creating it. And I've done that. If I've done it, I'm here 1,000%. And the people I train are here for you 1,000%. There's hope. You can do it at any age.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Laura. I really appreciate it. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on Hopeful Conversations. Be sure to tune into our next episode. And until then, remember, hold on, pain ends. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much.